Bom dia a todos. Aqui é o Retorno do Mundo. My name is Jason Kennedy, and I am a senior lecturer above the bar at AUT. And today I'm talking to you about animation-directed embodied performance technique, or something I called ADEPT. And I'm going to give the cameraman something to do, so I'm going to walk around a lot. All right. So, with this, my background is as both a professional animator and actor. And I combined that knowledge together in my research, including in my PhD, which I finished about almost 4 years ago now, which looked at the nature of acting within animation and motion capture. And so it's a little bit naughty here, because I'm not talking about exactly my PhD, but I'm talking about some work that has extended based on the research that was started then. Animation, I don't really presume that anybody here is an animator, but just giving you kind of a basic sense of it. When we use the term animation, it can refer to the whole process of creating a film, which could be even a VFX film, visual effects film, from start to finish, idea through all the different stages of production to post-production to the final output. But animation also refers to the process of actually animating a character itself, or the character animation process. So that's really what I want to focus on in this presentation. There are robust workflows at every stage of that process, but specifically I'm looking at what's going on in this step right here. And not just that, because that step has a lot of little sub-steps to it as well. Within the process specifically for 3D animation, there is a bunch of planning that needs to go on, that needs to be laid down right at the start before we get going anywhere to give us a good result in the end. And then there are all these other steps that are involved: logging, linear, spline, polish. You don't need to worry about those today. We're not talking about those today. But those are ways that we can construct performance and give ourselves something that's going to look good. But here within planning is where the main part of this comes in. And so for each of these different steps in here, movement studies, planning sketches, gestures, pencil tests, all of those things have a lot of stuff written about them already, except for one, which is video reference. And video reference, for me, is one of the absolute most important parts of this process, and that's where I tie in my knowledge of being an actor and an animator together. So that's really what this research starts focusing on. So this is a first of its kind attempt to develop a teachable framework of embodied performance practice for creating animation video reference. So reference, when I'm talking about reference in this form, it can mean a lot of different things, but specifically in this form, reference is a person performing physical and or emotional cues used to guide an animated performance. Something like we see here, this is from Little Mermaid, 1989, Sherry Stoner there was hired in as an actress to come in and perform physically for the animator's benefit the actions that Ariel would have gone through. And some of these great sort of match-to-match images here showing Glenn Keane's fantastic animation there of the character. Live action reference helps to inject greater believability into the movements and expressions of animated characters. And that's really very vital to getting good, believable performances. Now, we're talking about embodied performance, and several people today and yesterday have talked about this concept of embodiment. It's an interesting term because it can mean a lot of different things. So within this case, it's a psychophysical process, right? There's psychology, that's sort of mental stuff, that's emotional stuff. There's also physical stuff that's going on. It's how the whole body basically is working as a system together. Engaging with that psychophysically in your own body during the process of creating a performance. So an embodied performer is somebody who strives to basically not be showing themselves during the performance, but to become more or less the character that they're playing. Right? And that sounds very much a lot like acting, right? Now, while it's not expected that we're going to turn animators into actors, because we're never going to do that, they will resist at every step of the way. I know, I've tried, okay? My previous research that I've done argues that certain embodied performance techniques enable animators to produce more creative, expressive, and believable video reference. So what are they, and how can we create a teachable framework around those things? And how do we make it so that the animators are not so scared of doing this, right? So, there is no unified teachable framework for this yet. While it is established that some elements of acting training are beneficial to animators, we don't have a protocol for how to go about doing this, and so that's where I'm trying to step in, humbly, if I may be so. When we have animation curricula around the world, usually at most, they may start to discuss some basic acting principles, such as those developed by Konstantin Stanislavski, probably the most famous acting teacher in the West. But this material is generally not explored in any meaningful depth. It's basically just some lip service applied to it. So the one person who has made a name for himself in this area of creating acting reference for animation is Ed Hooks. And Ed's been around. He was a professional actor for about 30 years before he started working with animators in 1996 at PDI DreamWorks on the film Ants. Anybody remembers that one? And he started putting together a program. He ran into all kinds of issues trying to work with animators, trying to apply an actor's technique directly to animators, and he soon discovered that animators are not actors, and they don't want to be, and you have to do things differently. So he's got a pretty good framework himself now for laying out some basic performance ideas for animators. It's tailored to be more accessible and immediately useful to educators who do not have professional acting experience, and for animators who are a bit camera shy, right? But while my friend Ed here has some great foundational material on the subject, the only issue is that Ed is an actor. He's not an animator. So where this needs some extra help along the way is that his approach relies on the animators being able to align his teaching skills with their existing production skills. He's not able to show them how to go from what they've produced into how to then interpret that as an animation. And so that's where I want to step in. That's where my combined experience comes in. I intend to go further, and I am currently working on my own book on this subject. And that's really where this research is going. So, learning how to perform for video reference is a process that takes significant and sustained amounts of time to develop. And really, it's ideally suited to a curriculum that can invest days or preferably weeks, sometimes months over each semester toward working on performance stuff. And unfortunately, even though many schools require students to produce their own video reference, they don't actually go in and teach them how to do it. Here's a camera, go film yourself. And guaranteed, the majority of people on there just are as mechanical as completely possible. There's no real actual embodiment going on with their performances. So I don't really have enough, I planned this, but I didn't have enough time for this part here. I talked to a few very good schools teaching animation and asked them, basically, do you teach video reference? And if you do you actually show them how to do this in a more embodied way? And the answer pretty much across the board was no. And this is not, I'm not ragging on these schools. This is merely just me saying, hey, I talked to some good places. Ravensbourne is probably the one that does the most interesting connection, but even there they bring in actors. They don't really teach the animators how to perform themselves. So while there are many ways to record reference, the utility of the reference that you create is only as good as the human performer's ability to produce the desired performance, right? So reference can be, it can be purely physical, that's fine, but also, really more interestingly, it can have an emotional element to it. It can have a sense of intention to it. We really like to find those complex performance choices and subtle expressions and things that we wouldn't naturally just think about when trying to draw a bunch of planning through a series of small images before we animate. So for actions that are especially skill-based or dangerous, we don't ask the animators to go out and do that themselves. We just tell them to go to, like YouTube if you want to get some parkour, or some cliff hanging, or some, dangerous figure skating, those sorts of things. That's okay. You can go to YouTube, Vimeo, whatever. Those people are professionals. They know what they're doing. But when the need arises for a more emotionally complex performance reference, it would seem the case, maybe we should bring in some actors to do this. But no, that's not what we do. Typically in animation studios, we rely on animators to film their own reference, even though they don't really know how, right? Some people develop their own techniques and approaches over time, but ultimately they're not really taught how to do this as effectively as possible. And then even for some smaller studios, they tend to have a single person, maybe the animation director, who creates the performance for all of the animated characters and just gives it to the animators and says, here, work from this. Right? So that really comes down to how well that person can act broadly across a number of range of characters. So here's a couple of quick examples. I'll make these very fast. Justin Wegg from The Wild Robot, just showing you how some people put together their animation reference videos. And there we go. So this is a very recent film. This is from this year. And we won't worry about the audio right now so much. But Justin here is, he's playing multiple characters at the same time, basically, stitching it all together and trying to get some kind of believable reactions. Another example here, it's from The Boss Baby, Anthony Hodgson and Ronnie Namani. Now, one of the challenges that we have with this is that these animators here, these are the animators themselves, are producing this reference that they're going to work from to create the actual animation. So this is first, that's second. And they're working to an existing soundtrack, right? So the voice actors have already done their audio, but now we have to perform to that audio, which is a distinct challenge for professional actors, let alone animators who don't know any better, right? So trying to come up with this framework requires me to ask a few questions, like how do you teach embodied performance skills to animators, especially if they have no interest in performing themselves? And that comes down to the fact that most early career animators, including students, have little, if any, acting experience. Creating physical performance is often intimidating. I know just being up here in front of people, I'm sure that some people in the past couple of days have felt a bit intimidated just standing up here in front of people, right? Presenting. Just think about being a student who's doing that in front of their peers, acting at the same time, right? So many animation teachers also feel that same way. They have that same fear, because that's how it's always been for them. So they're not comfortable teaching it either. And they just don't feel like they have a roadmap that shows them, to give them the confidence to be able to teach this. So that it kind of always feels to me like this, it's sort of being lost. Bugs Bunny lost. They should have taken that left turn at Albuquerque, right? So since there is no clear framework for exploring or testing animated character performance options through embodied practice, the current educational environment places greater emphasis on teaching technical capability than on building strong performance structure for animated characters. So now talking about the research that I'm doing specifically, it's both practice-led, add in some action research in there, and there's a bunch of other little things which we don't really have time to talk about today, but that's okay. Practice-led, that being where the journey through the practice is more important, that's the site of the research, more than the finished creative product itself in the end. And this allows me to integrate my dual expertise as an actor and an animator to provide an immersive and iterative process that bridges both fields. And the overarching framework here is informed by the concept of enskillment, which was recommended to me by the fantastic Professor Welby Ings. Thank you very much, Welby. I really appreciate your help with this. All right. And also this notion of an education of attention. So enskillment, if you haven't learned about this before or used it before, it's a really helpful tool. Right? Basically the gradual process of becoming skilled through direct participatory engagement with a practice. understanding is developed through embodied actions rather than just through abstract theory. And an education of attention is something I think is extremely valuable with our students, is a deliberate strategy used to train participants into the art of focused perception. Right? So, really what I'm trying to do in brief is help animators to pay attention to so many different salient aspects of what goes on in the body. The face, all the torso, all the movements through everything, right? By directing their attention to these details, both as they're performing and then while they're watching the results of their performances after and how they apply that onto their animated characters, they are able to better develop an inskilled perspective on how to work effectively and create more embodied reference, and therefore more embodied character performances in the end. Now, action research provides a dynamic participatory framework that allows for an ongoing collaboration between myself and the animators, so we can figure out what's working and what's not, and go back and forth with that a lot. That allows me to refine my teaching strategies to ensure my performance methods are well adapted to the needs of character animators, not just in school, but also in the industry. Some previous research I've done suggests that acting experience provides an animator with greater confidence exploring a range of performance options, right? It allows for people to go beyond the initial plan that they have. You learn things by doing this. You come across happy accidents. I didn't plan on doing this earlier, it just sort of happened, right? It was in the moment, I let it happen, it's fun, right? It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be able to open up our students to playfulness, okay? And this is the thing, is that our students, I'm sure you know, are not exactly playful, usually. Some of them are, but not all of them, okay? So this ADEPT framework, I call this animation directed embodied performance technique, and it is informed and built upon the teachings of several famous acting theorists, acting coaches. One of them is this fellow here. This is Michael Chekhov. Some of you may be familiar with him. Rudolf Laban, Ivana Chubbuck, Uta Hagen, some other ones, right? And I'm just building in based on my experience of performance training and lessons and things like that. So this framework is designed to empower animators to move beyond superficial performance choices, to go beyond the cliche, to promote more nuanced physical and expressive strategies when producing animation reference. And it's really here to help them tap into and correspond their performance with the narrative requirements of the story that they are trying to tell, and where those performance elements sit within a particular story. We are trying to create more believable character acting within animation. And importantly, I think, from the perspective of an educator, it provides them with clear exercises for how to teach this, to how to get students to engage with embodied performance techniques. We're trying to tap into that knowledge that exists within the body naturally, get people to be aware of that. How do you bring their attention to that? How do you give them that education of attention? How do you make their personal creative spirits become more playful, insightful, and generous? And I'm sure that you're all aware of this. We get so often caught up in our minds that we lose track of what we're feeling in our bodies, not just emotionally, but physically as well, right? So this is a way to help try to bring that awareness back to students and other animators. So I'm going to show you an exercise here, and I'll wrap up with this, that I'm working on. Now this occurs very early in the book. This is a very, very basic level exercise. It's not really going to go too much into any kind of cognitive depth, but here's a basic sort of understanding of it. We got a box. Here's the box. You'll need one prop from each of these categories. Something large and heavy, something large and light, something small and heavy, something small and light. Right? So here with this, you would also be recording it so that you have the chance to be able to do some talk aloud protocols, basically, report on what you're feeling as you're going through it. So, I apologize to all the people who are transcribing. I'm going to talk real loud now, and I hope you can hear me because I'm not going to be able to use the microphone anymore. Okay, so my plan here, I'm going to pick up this box. And as I do this, I'm going to pay attention to certain things. I'm going to ground myself in front of it first. I kind of want to know what my natural movement pattern is around this space before I begin. And from that, then I can look at what's different as a result. Ideally, I want to be moving across the camera so it can see me from the side. Okay? But now I'm going to return to my neutral position and I'm going to start to pick up this box. And based on this, I'm going to try to get it up to about here. And I'm going to start to feel where in my body do I feel tension? Is it in my knees? Is it in my legs? Is it in my thighs? Try to draw that attention to it. And then as I bring it up here and really try to get it sitting up here, now I'm looking at where does that sort of tension exist in the rest of my body. As I start to walk around with this, I start to notice, you know, do my steps, if this is really heavy, do my steps start to get a lot shorter? Do they start to, you know, does the weight start to really pull me down? For instance, this is so heavy. If it's really heavy, I have to kind of like lean back a lot because I got so much weight in front of me. If it's light, I could probably carry it out in front of me a lot like this. So it's not actually that heavy, is it? All right. So a lot of these things become just visual cues that imply weight, imply different things. So these are things I try to get our students to pay attention to. How can you exaggerate that sense? If I come over here, really quickly, last thing, I'm going to steal the water. All right? And part of this now, this is all just very physical. And what happens now, sorry, it's out of range. We would repeat this with each of those different sized objects, right? So I'm just jumping ahead here because I'm running out of time and I don't want to take it up. But, screw that. I'll do it off the top of my head. More than just technical, we'd also want to be thinking about why is the person picking up the box in the first place? What is the box to the character? What does it mean in the story? All of these sorts of things. So if this is the box that I've packed all my things in because I've been kicked out of the house, then the way that I approach this box itself is part of that story. And when I look into it, before I even pick it up, it will be part of the whole embodied performance process. You know, sort of a sense of what I'm losing at this moment before I have to leave. You know, and it is pretty heavy because, man, my wife packed it real good. She really wants to get rid of me, okay? But she also wanted to play a bit of a practical joke on me because she knows that she took some of the tape off the bottom so that by the time I make it out of the driveway and close to the Uber, oh crap, everything falls out. And now that's part of the story as well, right? And finding all that. So that just gives you a little bit of a taster of what I'm doing. I'll wrap up now so I don't take any more time. Thank you very much.